What's going on, fellas? Got a video from Kate and Michelle. 40 brutal truths men wish women, more specifically, modern women, knew. Let's get into it.
No, you're not. You're hearing me, but you're not actually talk about this feeling. Do you even care about how I feel?
70% of relationship-centered media, including books, movies, and TV shows, cater to a woman's perceptions and desires. But at what point does it become important to ask, what do men want? And while the curiosity and empowerment of women continues to rise with praise, it also seems to continue to surface itself at the consequence of diminishing men. And we all eat it up, subconsciously programming ourselves to see men as inadequate. Why would we need to understand them?
And some of these men be eating it up too. And you see it in the form, in my opinion, of, oh, it's daddy's little girl. And it's not wrong, and you should be spoiling your daughter. But sometimes they go overboard. And I get it. But they go overboard and have their daughters, and sometimes their sons too. Let's be fair about that. Their sons thinking that they're more than what they actually are. And then wonder why they're single.
Now, if it's not obvious, I'm not a man. So you might be wondering, what is a woman doing creating a video on this topic? Well, I polled my audience across multiple social media platforms, and I directly asked them, what is it that women do not understand about men? So on that note, here are 40 things that men wish women would understand about them. Which brings me to my first point. Learn when to shut up.
Damn.
Now, this might seem really harsh, but men value solutions over venting. Excessive talking without purpose feels overwhelming and somewhat counterproductive.
Yeah.
Now, men are wired to be solution focused. So when women come in without clear communication about what it is that they actually want, the logical side of a male's brain will take over and offer a solution to the problems that they're presenting.
Yeah.
And as a consequence of this, women tend to get defensive, frustrated, feeling misunderstood, and ultimately tell men that they simply aren't listening, when in fact, they are. But they are wired to solve problems versus ruminating on them.
Man, this is so true in my experience, and I've dealt with this multiple times. Obviously, I'm married now, but in past relationships, they'd be telling me, you don't understand what's going on. You just don't feel it like I feel it. And then I would proceed to, every single time, take a step back. And now it goes without saying, you should listen to your woman and value her and validate her feelings and stuff like that. But there comes a time when facts are facts and logic is logic. And they would tell me, you don't understand. You just don't feel it. And then I would go down the line. You're feeling like this. You're thinking about this. And it comes from this. And I'll give them the whole origin story about why they feel what they feel and how they feel it and what it feels like to the T, to the exact feeling. Is that right, or am I wrong? Oh yeah, you're right, but you don't feel it like I feel it. Didn't I just explain to you exactly how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way? Yeah, but I just can't explain it. You can't explain it because you're trying to make something up. I already told you what it is, and I understand it. These modern women be trying to make it seem like men are heartless. They don't have emotions. Men don't cry. Men don't really feel things from the deepest parts of their inner being. But then they have the statistics, which they make fun of men on, talking about men have higher or more successful rates of taking themselves out, eliminating themselves than women do. You don't think that's emotional? But y'all sitting up here telling us we don't have emotions. We don't feel things deeply just because we don't acquiesce to everything that you got going on. That's foolishness. She's spot on with this.
Alternatively, when a man is making a point, women can become combative and amplify negative emotion and further conflict, which only continues to build up tension between the two. There are situations where it is more important to seek understanding than being right. And this means knowing when to respect their opinion. And no, this doesn't mean completely diminish your own. And this brings me to my next point. Never belittle or disrespect a man. Men value respect much more than adoration or love. And women tend to be much more passive-aggressive, and this is because they are also, on average, much more agreeable. So instead of addressing issues head-on, they tend to make side comments towards their partner. And when they do this, especially in front of other people, it's somehow supposed to just be okay. And when they take it too far and they're called out on their bad behavior, they tend to respond with, "Oh, come on, it's just a joke." Meanwhile, if their partner were to make a similar comment that they found offensive in front of a group of people, "It's just a joke," probably wouldn't fly. And research indicates that respect is the most important factor when it comes to men in relationships.
Come on,
So disrespectful
preach.
jokes or belittling remarks can impact the quality of the relationship
Preach.
and how long it actually lasts.
I like when she said, but when they take it too far, because I think it's okay for everybody to express their opinion. And sometimes a man is going to need you to come out and say, "Hey, no, baby, I don't think we need to do it. I think we're about to get in trouble." But some of these modern women take it too far, and they be demeaning their man. They be degrading them. They be trashing them in front of people, and they think, he's fine with it. But if a man hit back, then all of a sudden it's a problem.
And alongside this, well, they had some other important points to note, such as, you are not a princess, just a person. Men do appreciate a level of humility, where a sense of entitlement comes off as selfish and demanding. And a comment from my audience made this point directly. I think the biggest misunderstanding is that when a guy does things that you ask him to, it's because he loves you, not because you control him. I guarantee the second that you make him stop loving you, he's gonna tell you to take a walk when you tell him to do things that you brag to all of your friends about.
Yeah.
You aren't a mastermind chess level manipulator. He just cares about
Amen,
you.
brother.
And this is an important
Amen.
point that I don't want to overlook. Women tend to focus on what they need from a man. Provision, protection, support, and if she doesn't get her needs met, her demands fulfilled, or constant attention, she can become entitled and say things like, "A real man would treat his girl like a princess." And yes, I've seen this. But at what point do women start to ask men what they want, what they need, or what they desire? Men are expected to service women, but are women held to the same standards? Why is this such a double standard? And even making this video, along with other men's issues focused topics, many men don't trust that I actually give about their problems. And I get it. Women seem to never ask or genuinely care about what men want, and seem to only focus on what they can get from them. And this brings me to my next point. Act, dress, and talk like a lady. There's an inherent expectation for men and women to present themselves with dignity and class. And I'd be amiss if I didn't acknowledge that this does vary from culture to culture. But when women don't have respect for themselves, take care of themselves, care about how they present themselves, or become adversarial in public, well, men aren't interested. A lot of people say that men are fearful or intimidated by women. But according to the feedback that I've received from men here, it's not that they're intimidated by women at all, but more so that they know a problem when they see one.
Yes,
when women
sir.
are lower in agreeableness and present with much more masculine temperament, they
Yes,
see this
sir.
as a volcano waiting to erupt. And instead of interacting with somebody that they know can cause problems, they avoid it altogether.
I like the point that she said, and you gotta recognize certain men love certain things. So there are certain men out there that would love tattoos. Oh man, she's smoking, man. She's fine. I gotta have that. But there's a certain way that you can present yourself with that. If that is not the vibe of the man, then you need to get out that man's face. They won't do that. They'll be in a man's face that they know don't want to have nothing to do with them. Oh man, he's the finest. He don't want you, sis. You keep on harassing him. You keep on messing with him. Get out his face. You don't take care of yourself how he takes care of himself. You don't present yourself how he presents himself. And I'm not necessarily saying it's a problem with how you present yourself, but y'all present yourself in two different ways. And he told you he didn't like it. And you still in his face talking about how men are misogynistic. It's the patriarchy and we got to fight it. No, you got to fight to leave him alone. You got to fight to get up out his face. Go shut up and sit down. Back to point number one. I'm glad you said that. Go ahead, Kate. You got it.
Does that sound familiar in the context of our current society? Men are biologically wired to seek women who present with class and restraint. It's a subconscious preference that's tied to a man's desire to seek a partner who embodies respect. And this brings me to my next point.
Restraint
and I'm just
was it.
going to use a direct quote here.
Restraint is a key word.
"We are not your gal friends. I have a 20-minute limit for being an emotional tampon. After that, speak to your friends or let us solve the problem." End quote. And I feel the point was made pretty clear by this comment. But another perspective I would like to add is the amount of care and understanding that women give men towards their emotions, and the fact that it's alarmingly absent. Women tend to have larger friend groups that they will lean on for support, whereas men, if they want other men, well, they tend to have to seek that out. They also take on the responsibility of a woman's emotions, which
Oh
means
my.
even if they have feelings, one of you, for the sake of both of you, has to remain centered. And
Oh
while men are
my.
wired for solutions, that doesn't mean that they're emotional stones.
Oh
What it does
my.
mean is
Come
that they're
on.
not necessarily allotted the same time, space, or respect to express or even validate or acknowledge their emotions.
Come
And
on.
oftentimes, if they have the courage to try, they are emasculated or these things are thrown in their face.
She preaching
Which
today.
brings me to my next point. Do not gossip. If you do, you do it about everybody, including him, and he knows that. This all comes down to responsibility. Your partner is an extension of you, meaning that when you think you're getting off because you're talking down about him, you're also, as a consequence, talking about the person that you are.
And I say this every single time, what they do on Netflix or TikTok, they talk themselves right out of relationships. The issues and the problems going on, they just don't shut up. Back to point number one. Everything that's going on with a man, they talk about it, and the man be like, "You're embarrassing me. We don't want that stuff out on Front Street." Oh, but I was just talking and sharing my feelings. Shut up. Back to the comment or the clip of the woman said, when the man asked, well, do you tell your friends what's going on with you and your husband? No. Why would I tell the chambermaids what's happening in the queen's quarters or something like that? And he was taking, whoa, that was a good, exactly. Because you tell them something and they'll remember it forever. And then they'll come back and try to cause problems in your relationship. Do not gossip.
chose this partner, and if the roles were reversed, I don't think this type of behavior would fly or go away quietly.
Exactly.
Gossip doesn't help anyone, ever. The problems that you have need to be discussed with the person that you have them with, not in public places or around people who only get to hear one side of the story. And this brings me to my next point, and I'm going to just leave the quote here. When you're fat, you're not a 10. You are a 2, only on a good day, if you are lucky. And again, I think I'm just gonna leave that comment there. And as this continues, this may feel more hurtful, but nevertheless, this is my platform to give them a voice, not about my opinions. So, on to the next one.
I respect
Women who have
that.
had more than one partner
I respect that.
for every 5 years of age are a red flag. Women have always set the standard for experiences, meaning that men will do what they need to do in order to get it. And what they need to do is reflective of the standards that women set for men. And no, this doesn't mean that men don't have standards, but oftentimes it is the female who controls the pace at which this happens. Not universally true, but directionally correct. And as Andrew Tate would say, a woman's job is to protect her innocence. And I do believe a lot of men would likely agree with that statement. And
Yes,
this brings me
sir.
to my next point. Learn
Yes,
at least
sir.
a little bit about the things that he likes. And this is so that at a bare minimum, you can engage in conversation around those things. And in their words, not sound like a complete moron, or engage in those activities without looking like a complete idiot, end quote. The point of this all is that men actually tend to bond through teaching or experiencing or going through activities. Creating things, building things, solving problems, etc. It's simply the act of doing or engaging in something. So it's important for longevity and the depth of the connection that you can have to actually have some type of interest in what he's interested in. As I can almost guarantee that he probably doesn't love sitting down and watching your reality TV shows.
Come on.
But he'll do it with you because he cares. And next on the list, and I think this one's actually pretty important, men do not see or understand hints. And they don't misunderstand you on purpose. They often don't understand your behavior, period. Especially when it fluctuates and jumps from emotion to emotion.
Oh
If you
my.
want something, ask for it. It's not the case, oftentimes, that they actually want to piss you off or frustrate you. It's that they actually don't know what you want them to do. And when it comes to men and women in relationships or dating, they'd like you to understand that you getting a guy is much easier than them getting a woman. And to back this point, I will say social media and dating apps absolutely support this with the data that we have. Men will get one match per 40 swipes on average, where women will get one match for every 2 swipes on average. And speaking of social media and attraction, well, if you focus on your sexuality, you will be judged for your sexuality. There are 3 really important points when it comes to any relationship that actually has depth. And I'm gonna break them down here just for simplicity's sake.
You know, I really appreciate that she's not necessarily saying that she agrees with everything, but she is allowing us to speak. I really appreciate that. I do.
One is the pool of chemistry, which you can have with thousands of people, but that doesn't really make a relationship last. It's what pulls you together, but it isn't really what keeps you there. Connection is a little bit deeper. things that you enjoy doing, things that you're interested in. It's what creates the next layer of depth in a relationship. But number 3, and the most important piece, is compatibility. And this comes down to values. Where do you want to go? How do you see your life together? What are the things that you find important? And a relationship with chemistry, connection, but without compatibility, it won't last. And sexuality or attraction is only one piece of a relationship. And speaking of attraction, this brings me to my next point. If you give attention to a guy, he will see it as a start. Garnering attention is not the same for men as it is for women. Women tend to get significantly more of it than men do. And as a consequence to that, when a man does receive attention from a woman, he sees this as if you are interested. So advice to women would be, don't lead men on and just be direct. That doesn't mean be rude. And this brings me to my next point, which I really appreciate somebody actually leaving. We don't always understand what we're feeling. Men aren't taught to really process their emotions. And this is something within the domain of what I study in the couples and people that I work with. Men typically present with 3 things. They're happy, they're horny, or they're angry. But anger is a secondary emotion. It's what they're comfortable with showing. And so just because a man is presenting as angry doesn't mean he's actually angry. And I think giving some grace and seeking understanding is really, really important when it comes to actually cultivating something real with somebody instead of pushing them off like they're an angry man who's reactive and controlling and narcissistic. But
It's good. It's a good thing to say right there, because a man might present with that, but if you do a little bit more digging, or you read the room, or you use your gut or your intuition, then you can say, well, why is it, baby, why are you angry? And then you'll find out he's not actually angry. He might be disappointed. He might be upset. But you'll know that because you actually took time to care about his emotions, right? So, yeah, that's a good point.
But I digress. And this brings me to my next point. There's no hidden meaning in our actions or words. Unless the guy does have some type of cluster B personality disorder, men tend to mean what they say and say what they mean. And they will tell you about themselves. Oftentimes what I find is that women don't really like it.
They don't like
For
it.
example, if a man says he doesn't want a relationship with you, but he's happy to keep it on the surface, women really struggle to actually accept that to be true, and instead will tell themselves that if they can be good enough and if they're patient, eventually, if they keep giving him what he wants, he will change his mind. And when he doesn't, what's really important to understand is that he means what he says. If he's not ready or not interested or not in a place where taking the relationship there with you is something that he wants, he will tell you. Again, pending that he's not a narcissist or anybody else that just has really manipulative behaviors.
And it goes for obviously things outside of that, because I've said some things in past relationships where maybe it's come off harsh, and it's, I know, and we'll be talking about it. We'll be talking about it. And they say, well, I know you really didn't mean that. And then I'll come back and I'll say, no, I actually did mean that. Now, I'm sorry you got offended by it. Or maybe I could have said it in a better way and less harsh or less forceful tone. But I meant what I said. And we're not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be doing that. If this relationship is going to be moving forward, this is what it is. And they just kept on thinking to a degree that this was going to be the case. And I come back and tell you a second time, that's not what it's going to be. Until I finally have to come back and say, maybe you didn't hear what I said the first time or the second time. I try to be patient, but we're not doing that. In my house, absolutely. And I'm not the biggest guy. And I don't go around here barking and doing all this screaming and I'm the man and beating my chest. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you. And about that third or fourth time, I'm going to say, maybe you didn't hear what I said to you. I'm not going in that direction. You can go by yourself, or you can find your way, but it's not going to be in my house, period.
And this brings me to my next point. The things that men and women are attracted to in one another are simply not the same. And to dive deeper on that, well, I'll get to my next point. We don't care about their careers, education, status, or money. And I'll read this as a direct quote. We don't get turned on by how confident they are. Our reaction shifts from not caring to actually being put off. It often comes off as cocky and bombastic. Mm-hmm. We don't want them to have experience and know what they're doing or expect them to perform. Well, That should be easy to figure out without me being explicit. We're not turned on by how independent they are, no matter how many songs Neo makes. And the problem with this is that it warps the way that they go about dating, since they think that these are legitimately high-quality attributes that they have to offer, and thus overestimate their own value and pursue the wrong type of man. Many guys express how this makes them feel like women simply do not care, only making distrust and discouragement from dating worse. And this brings me to my next point. Men are not intimidated by women. When it comes to them interacting with other men, if a man oversteps a boundary, it is very likely, but a decent man would never do that to a woman.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't stress this enough. And I've told my friends, some of my female friends, this before. The man, for your sake, is not putting his hands on you. But if it would have been one of his boys or one of these other dudes out here, you have crossed the boundary and he would have had to touch you up a little bit. He would have had to line you up a little bit. I'm trying to tell you, you need to back off. You're in his space. You're not physically in his face, but as far as like tension goes, you're right there in his face and he's telling you to back up. Through his actions, through his words, hints, behaviors, he's telling you to back up and you ain't catching it. Now you can't read the room. Now you can't read hints. And no. Okay. I'm trying. All right.
If you are argumentative or overstep boundaries, we simply won't deal with you, as the fight part of fight or flight is off the table. And this brings me to our next point. Listening is a two-way street. Many women listen to pop psychology or podcasts and suddenly become relationship experts, using psych language like validate, wounds, trauma, or labels like narcissist or codependent to take the spotlight off of themselves and create rules for thee, but not for me. Women tend to insist on validation, but never validate. They accuse men of not listening while simultaneously interrupting every chance they get. They may go down a path of self-diagnosis with things like ADHD to explain why they can't pay attention or listen to what their partner actually has to say, instead of taking accountability for how their actions might impact how their partner actually feels. And some women can use their children as leverage and then act appalled when they're called out on this really toxic behavior. And this brings me to my next point. When things get toxic, well, men don't want to reject women oftentimes. Men would rather make themselves unattractive to a woman so that a woman would break up with them, rather than having to break up with her. And as anecdotal experience with some of the men that I worked with, I can say that this pattern holds true. They will tend to wait until there's a justifiable reason to leave the relationship, or act in such a way that pushes the female away to her own breaking point, in which she breaks off. And this brings me to my next point. Stop using exceptions to the rule as points in an argument. Quote, stop with your anecdotes. I might say in general that women are shorter than men. And I hear, I know a girl who's 6 feet tall. It's a very annoying way to argue when you know, well, we are right. And I can say I've seen this play out on both sides, but I digress. I can agree that this style of arguing is unnecessary and annoying. And this brings me to my next point, which is insightful coming from a man. What women want and what women say they want are not the same. Today's world is so heavily influenced by faulty modern philosophies like feminism that men no longer get to select women who respect, honor, appreciate, or have confidence in men. Instead, we have to choose from the degree of confrontational women that we can accept. Feminist ideas are embedded in even the least feminist type women. They are simply ubiquitous at this point. Meanwhile, people don't even recognize the inherent contradictions, which I do want to highlight here. Women want a good man. They will tell you that he should be emotionally available, while not realizing intrinsically this will actually make him less attractive. Confidence is learned through experience, yet she wants him to be confident as a precondition. She doesn't owe him her confidence, nor respect, nor appreciation, but he should be totally committed to her. Nice guys are ick, but he can't be masculine. She wants the man that all women want, but he has to be faithful to her, even though she still wants women to have freedom, meaning that she can sleep around as much as she'd like, until she decides that the one that she's chosen must now only be with her. But if women are allowed to sleep around, who are they sleeping with? They clearly are choosing not to choose about 70% of men. So this 30% of men or so are supposed to satisfy this freedom of women? but somehow all these women are supposed to be married and committed to by this small pool of 30% of men. So he should, in return, ignore all of his other options for this one woman, even though the odds say that she will leave him when a perceived better option becomes available. And not only that, he must continue to provide for her, even in the aftermath of a divorce. And I'm going to leave this at the comment. While I do have an alternative perspective, I want to honor the experience that men are having, not throw my own biases into here. And that brings me to my next point, relative to keeping the peace. Men desire peaceful relationships. The world is inherently competitive. Resources are limited, so men are always in competition with other men, and they look to their relationship for the one place that they can find peace. You need to have peace to regroup, heal, analyze, and just de-stress. And confrontational women are the opposite of peace. So this is why many men want nothing to do with them. And speaking of confrontational, there's toxic people in both genders. That doesn't make masculinity toxic just because some men are toxic. And someone in my audience would say, as to toxic masculinity, there is no such thing. There's masculinity, which women are inherently attracted to, and it's necessary to build and protect our society. And there's femininity, quote, tradwives, not feminists, which men are inherently attracted to. That is also necessary to civilize our society. There's toxic people in both parties. That doesn't make masculinity or just femininity inherently toxic.
Amen.
This brings me to my next point. Speaking of feminism, it doesn't make you attractive to emasculate men. The media does that enough already. Especially if you're a parent, do you ever notice how men and fathers are constantly depicted as low intelligence, clumsy, and incompetent, with a female lead rushing in to save the day? In mainstream media, Disney movies, and popular family TV shows like Modern Family. And advertisers often portray the male role as incompetent, inadequate, and just overall an idiot, while the female lead comes in and saves the day by being the sensible one who unfortunately has to tolerate all of men's inadequacies. And this brings me to my next point. We like women, not men. So stop being so masculine.
You gotta wonder what this storyline does for women. Because they, at that point, they're writing stories about, well, I want to be the one that's sensible and has a logic and is seen as that. Does that mean that you don't feel like you're that way ordinarily? Like, what group of people are you hanging around that makes you feel like you're not sensible, like you're not logical, like you don't have good ideas? If you're hanging around people that make you feel like that, you need to get about the way. Number one. Number two, if that's an insecurity with you and you feel like you need to continue writing shows like this and your audience continues to identify with this, what is wrong with the mass audience that you're presenting to? That lets me know that there's a deeper issue at large with women like this. And they keep on saying, well, yeah, I'm having that same experience. You're having the same experience that you need to correct. But you feel validated because somebody's showing it on TV and it's not right. It's not right. You need to get out of that.
I actually asked this commenter to elaborate on what they meant, and here's exactly what they said. It's hard to describe something that I feel on a primal level. However, masculine women who take the leading dominant role in dating, and I don't mean that to be in bed, because men apparently can override this attraction when it comes to their physical attraction to somebody, they tend to start overlooking red flags. And to further the quote, because of this revolution towards masculine women has always overcome my base lust, and I have turned down the advances of women who are way more attractive than me. All of this seems to suggest that there's just something repulsive about overly disagreeable masculine women. And this brings me to my next point. Women always take and never give. Women being the empathetic gender was the biggest lie of the century. Most of the time when you talk about dating or relationships with women, it's always about me. I want, I need, but I never offer, or I do. And that's why men have given up. Why would a man go into a relationship with a woman who can make the same salary as me because equality has been achieved? But I have to give everything and she is expected to give nothing just to be present. And even if that's a match, the minefield of a woman's psyche is a mystery to men. The amount of game, tantrums, and then one day she doesn't like you anymore, and that's it. You lose half your shit because she doesn't feel love for you anymore, or her female narcissism isn't met by you. And this brings me to my next point pretty nicely. In the short term, men have much more at risk than women do. Entering a relationship represents a significant sacrifice for men. It means sacrificing our finances, independent social life, free time, ease of security, hobbies, and often our emotional and psychological well-being, which is why men tend to be more cautious before jumping into a long-term relationship, whereas the benefits for women are a little bit more obvious on the front end of a relationship. Status, social connection, security, finances, and this means that men will have a longer time horizon to consider whether or not this is worth investing into long term. And women tend to pressure men to become seriously committed within a 2 to 3 month span, whereas in a man's mind, he's thinking a little bit more along the timelines of 6 to 12 months, because from his perspective, he wants to see a longer track record of financial responsibility, respectfulness, emotional stability, and other green flags. And that will give him a lot more confidence to proceed with said woman. And this brings me to my next point. Men tend to be guilty until proven innocent. Many men won't admit this, but they tend to be a little terrified of the consequences of reputation smearing that women tend to do. And for good reason. It can cost them their livelihoods. For women, it seems to be innocent until proven guilty. They're always the victim, not the perpetrator. Whereas men, it seems to be quite the opposite. They are always assumed to be the perpetrator, and inherently always guilty.
What did we just talk about with Deion Sanders and his ex-wife about her being charged, I think it was, or accused of DV? And what was it, a couple videos, last video or something before that, where Deion Sanders on the senior night of his two sons was walking out, and they were walking to midfield, and as soon as he saw his ex-wife, he bolted. I mean, when we say bolted, and we all know that Deion Sanders, he's got problems with his foot. The man hasn't moved that fast. I have not seen that man move that fast in a while. The man turned on a dime. He looked like he was still in the NFL, and he bolted the other as soon as he laid eyes on her, the man went the other direction in a flash. Superman flew the other way. It was like he had one of those little things that Batman has, and he threw it like the little zip lines or whatever it is. He threw it, it caught hold of something, and it just jerked him to the other side of the city. That's what it looked like. And so, and that's why when men see trouble, they go the other way, because I already know you're going to think I did it when I had nothing to do with it in the first place.
And this brings me to my next point. Women don't seem to understand how important it is for men to have male friends. Men simply need other men to do men stuff with. No utility, no performance, similar taste and humor. And this can be a place where they feel understood, allowing them to relax, let go, and breathe for a little while. And it seems to be that women don't necessarily understand that men don't really have the same level or number of connections and relationships that they do. And oftentimes women can feel uncomfortable with men having strong male friendships, especially if their male friends tend to engage in behaviors or be single because they assume that their partner will be up to mischief is about. And this brings me to my next point, the double standard on infidelity. If a man steps outside of a relationship, he's pretty much labeled forever. Men are dogs, he will never change. Once a cheater, always a cheater. But when a woman cheats, everybody's interested in understanding her side of the story. The assumption is that women who do cheat were pushed to cheat for some toxic or disrespectful reason. Whereas when men cheat, they're selfish, ego-driven, doing it for their own lust and temptations, instead of honoring and respecting their female counterpart. But is this true? Do men and women ultimately cheat for different reasons? Are women always pushed when they step outside of a relationship? And are men always only doing it to seek their own selfish desires? And this brings me to my next point. Men do have emotions. They're not stones. And if they aren't expressing them to you, well, they simply don't trust you. Men have a lot of fear around expressing their emotions, and this was very adamant in the comment section. Men are not supposed to show emotions or vulnerability because they're seen as weak, and there is a fear that she will lose interest in him if he does. As human beings, we experience the same spectrum of emotions, though society, in many ways, tells men it's not masculine to identify any of your emotions except for anger. This leads a lot of men to be self-destructive or engage passively in behaviors. And here's another quote that I found really interesting. I really want to share how I believe tons of men are out there experiencing emotions throughout their lives that they don't necessarily know that they're experiencing. To a lot of men, I think a lot of emotions are experienced simply as discomfort, and thus avoid it. We are not at all that often taught to engage or how to engage with our emotions. It might be something that most men learn to work with by themselves. My key point here is that men feel more than women think that we do, and I think that that point is incredibly important. And this brings me to my next point. Men and women simply have different motivations for choosing one another. Basically, women need men without desiring them, while men desire women without necessarily needing them. And I quote, "Women love animals and children unconditionally, whereas the second a man falls short of his expected utility, or a woman decides she's having a midlife crisis, and her toxic friend group enables her, she can take half of everything and slander his reputation. Men want peace, and women want constant attention, stimulation, and chaos to feel alive." And as a consequence to that, this brings me to my next point. Men are tired in the modern world. Nothing we do is good enough, and even when we work our entire lives to build a business or acquire skills that women are unwilling to, we can have our livelihoods decimated by a woman who decides she no longer wants to be married or watches the wrong podcast about independence. It gets exhausting to have to feel like you are supposed to develop both physical and emotional excellence, have none of it appreciated or celebrated, only to realize that in the end, none of it mattered, especially as a woman's emotional state simply changes one day. And I quote, "I gave up on women because I woke up. I'm tired of doing everything wrong. I'm tired of emotional manipulation. I'm tired of being unwelcome in my own house. I'm tired of giving everything that I can and getting little to nothing in return. I've been single for over 5 years now, and I've never been happier." And this brings me to my next point. Most men are invisible to women. It's viewed as a given for men to often do all of the protection, manual labor, provision, as if a man should just do that, where women are rarely asked to provide or perform any sort of utility for their male counterparts. If women screw in an IKEA table, we throw a parade. If men fix the roof or take down an attacker, well, it's something that they should do. And I quote, "I think it's a fact that I could be easily invisible, that unless I make the effort to go out and talk to somebody, or even initiate, nobody will talk to me or even smile at me." And this honestly just breaks my heart. As a personal side note, I'm sorry. And this ultimately leads me to a very important point, which is how much men hold back. Women demand empathy and space for their feelings, but rarely reciprocate in that department. And most men are not direct because most women can't handle direct communication. Men do not express anger for fear of being labeled or invalidating, and men's voices tend to carry more. Thus, men must have more self-control, whereas women are not only encouraged but celebrated for expressing anger or other volatile emotional states. And I quote, "Women don't recognize how much we hold back, as to not hurt them, both physically and emotionally. And we don't do this for other men. It's just for women, because contrary to popular belief, women are indeed delicate, even if they don't act like it." Which brings me to my next point. Words can hurt and leave a scar much longer than bodily wounds. Wounded women go straight for the jugular, especially when they feel scarcity or fear of abandonment. And this is where vulnerabilities get weaponized to push men over the edge. And sometimes women will push men to where it gets physically confrontational, where then women can leverage this and take legal action or write a victim narrative. Now, I want to personally emphasize the fact here that domestic is never okay, nor is it justifiable. But the stories we never hear are the 1,000 emotional paper cuts that lead to the snap. Women know they can't physically overpower a man, so they can take a man's purpose and use it as a dagger instead. A real man would provide for his family. A real man would be able to satisfy me during. You'll never make enough money to really provide. My ex was better than you in bed. Our kids deserve a better father than somebody who would talk to me like this after she a man verbally. And these cases happen more often than you'd think. And no, this isn't just a one-way street, but it is important to acknowledge that this does indeed happen to men. And this brings me to my next point. We are more honest than you think we are. The most common thing that women don't understand men is our outside to inside. Unless the guy is narcissistic or some other personality that makes them feel like they're required to wear a mask or a shield. We are the same all the way through. Men are pretty simple. We want peace, play, enjoy. Unlike women, we don't ask 20 questions. We tend to just go straight to the thing if we have a concern. Don't ask, don't get. Men will follow rules if they exist, and we often follow them as law, specifically in a relationship. And this brings me to my next point, which I think is arguably the most important one. Men are not afforded the same time and space to express that women are, and they take that sacrifice willingly. This is a long quote, so I am going to read it. You're in psychology, so obviously you're going to be told all kinds of information about talking about your problems and expressing your emotions. Know this, however, this entire line of thinking is a part of a gynocentric view of mental health. Why are men so bad at these things? Because they're just broken women? Or are men just different? Consider cavemen. What happens when a bear decides your cave looks like a good hibernation spot? He can't break down and cry that he's about to fight a frickin' bear. He doesn't have the time to talk about his feelings of inadequacy to his job, and even if he did, and is his family going to feel confident for him to defend them if he does? No, he simply has to go out and face the bear, or predator. Even if he comes back and vents his emotions, meanwhile, one of the other men is giving a primal roar of victory, which man do you think the women and children will feel confident for in the future? Why would the men and women feel confident in you next time if you were so uncertain and scared this time? So the other men who have to work with him will respect him less, ultimately. Men bond over these shared dangers and challenges. If he feels he can't rely on you the next time, well, also, women will be less attracted to him, even if it's not conscious. So even if modern psychology is good for men, as it's good for women, it's not worth the cost, and it seems to be teaching men to become better women. Thousands of years of evolution is not so easily overridden. So what do men need? Time and peace to deal with their emotions internally. Or an adequate support system. He needs his woman to tend to his physical and mental wounds without looking down on him, but instead appreciate the sacrifices that he takes on. He needs a woman who builds him up, even if she knows he was likely terrified and potentially still shaken up. He needs her to show confidence in him so that he knows no matter what, she's still loyal to him. Men are willing to sacrifice themselves, but only so long as they get respect, appreciation, and her confidence in him. And he needs her to understand how he felt, even without his need to verbalize it. Ever wonder why women are so emotionally intelligent? This is one of the reasons why women tend to be good at this, while men struggle. Which brings me to my next point. Men and women are different.